Welcome back to Mirror's Signal podcast. I'm your host, Josh Holleran, and today we are joined by Jeff Lucas. In today's episode, Jeff shares his story to qualifying as a driving instructor and some of the difficulties that he faced when he was training, and then why he moved on to PDI training and keeping it simple. So there are three words that he uses during his training, and he goes into them in this episode, and that is discovery, clarity, and practice. And what we talk about is how you can apply them in your lessons. So there's a bunch of information in this episode. Jeff spent a few years teaching people how to become driving instructors. So if you're enjoying these episodes, please make sure that you hit the subscribe button. You can also leave any thoughts that you've got in the comments and make sure that you give the episode a like. If you're currently watching on the YouTube app, you can also listen to all of the episodes and they're available on YouTube Music. If you'd like any more information around the podcast or what's coming up, make sure that you head to our Facebook page or group, and they're both available at Mirror's Signal Podcast. For now, we'll get on with the episode. I hope you all enjoy. Jeff, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Josh. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So, for the people that haven't heard of you yet
hmm
or haven't come across your YouTube channel, which we may talk about later on, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit and give us a bit of your background?
Sure. So I've been a driving instructor for around 17, 18 years now. For I think 15 years, I've been an ADI trainer. I've worked independently as an instructor and independently as a trainer, but I've also worked for largish stroke national driving schools, helping PDIs through the whole process of part one, part two, part three. And I've lost track of the actual numbers, but it's in the hundreds of PDIs that I've helped through the process. Um, in terms of my prior experience, I've had a very checkered career path. I started off as a designer, then I moved into marketing, then I moved into being a consultant and a director for a public limited company. Then I got made redundant a couple of times in the uh, 90s due to economic recessions. So I decided I was just going to jack all of that in, lost interest in the corporate world. So then I became a publican. My wife and I ran our village pub that's literally 200 yards away from our front door, quintessential country pub for 5 years. And yeah, that was great. Completely different skill set required. And then we decided to sell that and move on because my two sons at the time needed a lot more support in terms of their education and their development. So I then was scratching my head and thinking about what to do next. And at that time, my son, who had just turned 17, obviously needed to learn to drive. And I'd also seen a lot of adverts on the television at that time from Red Driving School, telling everybody it's being a driving instructor is a great job. You can earn 30 grand a year and get this and you can get that. And I thought, oh, yeah, that could be interesting. So I started to teach my son how to drive. And the first thing that I realized, having driven him down to a local industrial estate on his very, very first lesson, and we parked up and then we swapped seats. And I was sat there scratching my head, thinking, I have absolutely no idea how to teach anybody how to drive. I know what to do. How do I get out of my head what I know into somebody else's head who has no idea what they're doing? And I just found that a really fascinating process to go through. Um, and that sort of stimulated me into looking a little bit more into being a driving instructor. And then, cut a long story short, after about a year to 18 months of research, I decided to join up with a training company. That didn't go well, but eventually I got some rescue training from somebody that I resonated with a lot more than my previous trainer. They helped me to simplify everything down, to understand a lot of the training that I'd been given was unnecessary and was overcomplicating matters for me. And that sort of awakened me into thinking about things in a different way than perhaps I'd been trained before. So I passed my part three test on my third and final attempt. And then from there, having had a really terrible experience through my PDI training, my part three training in particular, um, once I'd sort of got my feet under the table in terms of feeling confident that I knew what I was doing there or thereabouts in teaching learners, I then thought, right, okay, now what I want to do is help other PDIs never, ever, ever go through the same experience that I went through, because it was soul destroying. It wasn't just the money, albeit that was a factor, because it cost me £3,000 in training fees at the time and took me about 18 months to complete the process. But it was more the emotional side of things. It was just soul destroying. It was at the end of a training session, which typically normally was about 6 to 8 hours, I'd walk out of the car from having had some part three training with a trainer who, to be honest, he was a nice guy. He clearly knew his stuff. He wasn't deliberately trying to make things difficult for me, but my head was pounding. I had a raging headache because I was just being data dumped all of this supposed essential information that I needed to learn, which actually ultimately proved not to be the case. And I've sort of put my commitment and passion into trying to find simpler and more effective ways of helping PDIs through this whole process, particularly with part three.
That's a lot to untie. We've covered a lot of time there in about what, 5 minutes? That's a varied background. Um, and an interesting way into the industry. And you're not alone in that. I know a few people that have had the challenge of teaching their children to drive, realize that maybe it's not that easy. I know we're going to discuss, because you mentioned it there, about simplifying it.
Yeah.
I think teaching your children comes with its own challenges, whether you're a driving instructor or not. Um, but yeah, very interesting background. And I think a path into the instructor industry, you're not alone with that, whether that's through career or wanting something else, or you teach a family member to drive and it's like, I want to give this a go. I want to learn what this is about. And then how long did you say it was? 18 years later, still going as an instructor. Is it 18 years you've been doing this?
Yeah, I think, oh, I forget now, 17 or 18 years.
17 or 18 years. And then a large portion of that training people and helping them not make the same mistakes that were maybe made very early on in your training to become a driving instructor. What were some of them things? You mentioned that you was leaving after a day's training with headaches. You just had a lot of information dumped on you. How are you finding, because I expect a lot of the content may have been needed, but to try and get that from yourself to PDIs to help them qualify, what are some of the changes that you've made?
So I think you're right. A lot of the content is needed, but what a lot of, in my experience, ADI trainers and ADI training providers don't acknowledge is that the person that's receiving the training probably already has around about 80% of that knowledge in the first place before they even think about becoming a driving instructor. They've built it up through years of and perhaps decades of experience, possibly being a driver, but also maybe through work experiences, possibly being a trainer or a coach of a maybe kids football team or sports team, or helping their children learn and understand new challenges, or perhaps in a more formal environment, maybe they've come from a teaching or coaching background. Most of us at some point in our lives, if we're 25 plus, will have been exposed to lots and lots and lots of information and skill sets that are absolutely relevant to teaching people how to become driving instructors. However, the way that most ADI training courses are structured ignores all of that. It takes the trainee as a empty vessel. You know nothing. Okay, so I'm your trainer. We have a set program of training. If you go by this set program of training, you'll learn what you need to learn, and you'll pass your part 3 test, or you'll pass your ADI exams. So quite a few years ago, the old fashioned way for a driving instructor to teach a learner was to have the attitude, look, I'm your driving instructor. I'm the professional. I know everything. You know nothing. So listen up, pay attention, do what I ask you to do, when I ask you to do it, and how I ask you to do it. And as long as you listen to me and you do that, then you'll learn how to drive and you'll pass your test. And unfortunately, when it comes to ADI training, we seem to still be stuck in that mindset. When somebody gets in a car with a trainer, typically what they're exposed to is, right, okay, great to meet you. No conversation about who you are, what you've done, any previous knowledge or experience or transferable skills you've got. It's just, right, let's open the book. Let's look at module 1. Right, so today we're going to cover off this, 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 this. And what I found, and I'm sure many PDIs find, is when you are trained in that way, you're treated like a bit of a dumb animal. You're sitting there in receptive mode. All you're doing is trying to listen and concentrate to what you're being told is essential and important information. And because none of your previous knowledge or experience has been brought out in the initial stages, it feels like everything you're being taught is brand new. And therefore, you have to focus and concentrate really, really, really hard to make sure you're taking all of this new, essential, critical information on board. And typically, after about 2 hours, you start to lose focus, but you still know it's important that you need to concentrate, because if you don't concentrate, you're going to miss important stuff. So you start to focus and concentrate even harder. And then typically what happens is your neck muscles stiffen up, your shoulders stiffen up, you start to get a little bit of a headache, but you still have to continue to focus. And then you're on to the next module. You haven't even had time to reflect on the previous module, but now you're into the next one, and so on and so forth. So you walk out of the car at the end of maybe 4, 6, 8 hours, and your head is exploding. You walk away from that training session with a feeling of confusion, frustration, bemusement, but also a sense of you're a bit of an idiot, really, because clearly what you've been trained should have made sense because you're sat with a professional trainer. But you're left with that sinking feeling of, it didn't make sense. I don't understand why it didn't make sense. And then in the next training session, you just go through the same process again. And you might want to say to your trainer, can we just back off a little bit? Just let's recap what we covered off last time, because I've got some important questions and I didn't really get these things that you were saying. But the time scale, because you're in a fixed regimented training program, doesn't allow for that. So in the next training session, let's open up the training book. Right, we're now on to the next module. And a lot of people, in my experience, are fearful of speaking up to their trainer. Because they've been told right from the outset, They're the trainee and they're sitting next to an expert who they will accept is the expert. They won't question that because they've got no frame of reference to question it. So they'll sit there and they'll just go back into receptive mode, go, right, okay, I'm feeling tense. I know the last training session was incredibly hard. Hope this one's a bit easier. I need to listen up and pay attention. And it just goes on and on and on. And it's just, unfortunately, not a great process for lots of people. It's an arduous process, and it shouldn't be. It should be a fun process. It should be an engaging process. It should be a stimulating process. It should be an enlightening process, and it should be an powerful process. But I'd say probably 95 times out of 100, unfortunately, it's the exact opposite.
Again, a lot of information there that I'm trying to unpick and will make sense of. It must be hard. I'm not a trainer, and everything seems to be built around 40 hours
Yep.
plus 20 hours additional. And that's not a long time to learn or to develop the skills to build a new career in something what potentially is completely different. What's interesting that you've said is most of us will have about 80% of what we need to become a driving instructor, and it's maybe not referred back to and made relevant in the training. Why is it happening for people that are coming into the industry? I know because I've spoke to a few that are finding it difficult. Why is this still the case, do you think?
So the 40 hours plus the additional 20 hours, if you're going to go on a training license, is dictated by the DVSA. So anybody that's selling a training course, if you like, a typical training course that involves face-to-face in-car training, needs to deliver and prove that they have delivered, excuse me, a minimum of 40 hours of training in order for somebody to be able to apply for a training license. And then when they receive the training license, then they need to do a further additional 20 hours of part three training, face to face or partly face to face, in order to meet the DVSA requirements. So where driving schools and training providers are coming from is, okay, so that's the sort of compliance that is required. We need to deliver at least 40 hours, and we may also need to deliver an additional 20 hours if somebody wants to go on a pink license. So what we'll do is we'll put a training package together that is designed around delivering 40 hours of training for part three. We'll price it up accordingly. Most of the training is going to get outsourced. We're probably going to be paying trainers somewhere in the region of 50 to 60 pounds an hour. That's quite a big cost to us as a business. So where possible, we'll try and get 2 or perhaps even 3 trainees in a car. So we're still only paying the trainer £60 an hour, but in terms of the way that cost is calculated, that equates to us only investing £20 an hour if we've got 3 trainees in the car. So it's a numbers game. It's spreadsheet crunching. It's following a process that makes commercial sense, but makes no sense in terms of training quality. The reality is, if you decided you wanted to self-train, which you can do, perfectly, absolutely fine. DVSA have no problem with that whatsoever. You don't need to prove that you've done 40 hours of training or indeed any hours of training. If you're good enough to pass your part three test because you've self-trained and you've studied hard and you've worked hard and you've practiced, and maybe you got support from a local ADI who knows their stuff, and maybe you've done lots of online training and you just feel like you've got your head around it all and you know what you're doing, there's absolutely nothing to stop you to go down and pass your Part 3 test on your first attempt. You don't need to present any paperwork to the DVSA whatsoever, and they'll be quite happy to pass you off as long as they feel comfortable in your ability to be able to deliver an effective driving lesson to a student. So, unfortunately, I think the industry has just been structured in such a way over decades now to focus on ADI training and specifically Part 3 training in a very commercial way rather than in a supportive way.
How have you made the changes then? So you've gone through this, you've had all the information given to you, you've left training, you're struggling, it's not making sense. You've failed a couple of part threes, you're coming up to
Yeah.
your last attempt, you got rescue training and then went on to pass your part three, and here we are now a few years later. What have you changed and where do you think the difference can be made for PDIs that are watching or for ADIs that are looking to move into the training? How can we make this more effective for people?
Okay, so let me just take you back a little bit in terms of, if you like, the first light bulb moment for me in terms of my own training. When it came to rescue training, knew I knew I wasn't going to get through Part 3 if I stuck with my current trainer and training provider. So again, I did some internet research. I found a guy that was fairly local to me, had a lot of good reviews. So I reached out. And we had a conversation over the phone. I sort of explained basically where I was coming from and what I was looking for. And he said, yeah, I think I can help you. So he came over to me. We had a little bit of a training session. And the first thing that he asked me to do when we were in a car, we got parked up at the side of the road. He said, right, okay, so we've got a left-hand turn just up ahead, only 100 yards up ahead. He said, all I want you to do is just teach me how to turn left. That's it. Just a straightforward left-hand turn from a major road into a minor road. And I was waiting for him to give me this word picture that my previous trainer had said. So, normally you get, so I'm a novice driver. I've only had 5 hours of previous driving experience, but I do know how to drive a manual car. And you can assume my eyesight is fine. He didn't do any of that. He just went, just teach me how to turn left. I went, right, okay. So I reached behind me and I got out my visual aid book and I opened it up to the page, what you need to teach somebody to turn left from a main road or major road into a minor road. And then I started going down the bullet points, which I'd been trained were essential because you had to teach a student all of the critical pieces of the MSPSL routine in order to get them to turn left correctly. 10 seconds into my briefing, which is what I was told that I had to give to every student, he went, whoa, whoa, what are you doing? And giving you a briefing. And he reached across, he grabbed a book out of my hand, he threw it on the back seat. He said, fuck that. He said, just teach me how to turn left. He said, do you know how to turn left? Yeah, of course I do. Well, just tell me what you know. I went, oh, right, okay. So I talked him through it. We did a successful left-hand turn. We pulled over and he went, why are you making life so hard for yourself? And from that moment on, it dawned on me that all of this information and content that had been pumped into my head was totally unnecessary. I'm not saying it had no relevance to what I was meant to be doing to be a driving instructor, but it just way overcomplicated it. So from that day on, I've even in driving lessons, I've tried to simplify things as much as I possibly can. Now, making things simple isn't actually simple. It's quite a hard and rigorous process that you need to go through because it requires a lot of self-reflection. you try to teach somebody something a certain way, and then you recognize that that was a little bit of a struggle, maybe for you, maybe for them, maybe for both of you. So what you need to do post lesson is go away and think, how could I make that easier? How can I make it easier for me? How can I make it easier for them? And then you try that, and then you make a little bit of an improvement, but then you need to refine it still further. And it's a constant refinement process. And the more you refine it, the closer you get to the point of making things as simple as they possibly can be, both for yourself and also the person that you're supporting. Um, you still have all of the knowledge and experience and the acronyms and everything else all stored away in your memory, but you only bring them out if you absolutely need to. Don't pack in stuff that isn't relevant to what it is that you're trying to do at that particular time with whomever you're with. So I've sort of taken that concept and that thought mindset into my part three training, which is why I don't principally focus on the 17 competencies. I tend to focus more on three simple words, which are discovery, clarity, and practice. And if you know what those three words are and how to use them effectively in driving lessons, then I'm not saying the 17 competencies aren't important, but you can pretty much forget about them, because if you use discovery, clarity, and practice effectively, you just naturally be ticking the boxes that are relevant to the 17 competencies in the Path 3 test sheet, and you'll be probably scoring twos and threes all the way down.
So you've said about discovery, clarity, and practice and making things simple, and that it's difficult to then make things simple,
Mm-hmm.
and you've got to do reflection and everything else. So thinking back to what you mentioned about your trainer,
Mm-hmm.
he got rid of your notes. And it sounds a little bit like, from what you've said, it was no longer about your notes and your bullet points. It went back to being about the student and what they needed to know at that time. How
Yep.
can we put all of that together?
What do you mean by that?
The discovery, clarity, and practice. How do we utilize that and bring the best out of the student?
So, in essence, if we think about it, a driving lesson is, or at least should be, based on a series of conversations and experiences. So, in terms of discovery, you definitely use it at the beginning of a lesson, but you should also use it at several points throughout a lesson. And discovery is really focused on you as the instructor trying to discover as much as you possibly can without being intimidating, without putting them under the Spanish Inquisition, but just try to tease out of them as much as you can that you think is going to be potentially important to what it is that you're then going to support them with. So check in. How are they feeling? Are they feeling bright? Are they feeling bubbly? Have they got a cold? Are they stressing about exams? Have they had an argument with their boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, whoever it might be? Is there something else going on in their lives that could mentally distract them away from what it is that you were thinking about practicing? Okay. So asking a simple question like, how are you? It's a bit of a nicety, but it's got a real purpose behind it as well. Because if you don't get that important first starting point, everything else that you then do could be a complete waste of time. You could have the mindset of you're going to go off and do dual carriageways for the first time with that student. So maybe a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, higher speeds, slip roads, on, off, etc., etc. You don't bother to check in with the student, and then you suddenly find out when you're going down the slip road that they're disappearing inside their heads, their brows are furrowed, all of their body language is stiff, and then eventually you pull over and you check in and you go, so what's going on? How are you feeling? Oh, I'm just really stressed today. This happened yesterday. Well, wouldn't it have been a good idea to find that out in the first place? Mm-hmm. So two of the most important qualities that we can have or should have as driving instructors and instructor trainers is what I call using open questions and active listening. And those two are absolutely critical, and they go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. So you have to ask open questions, which is all about discovery. And then you have to use active listening to genuinely pick up on what the student is saying or perhaps not saying, pick up on their body language, pick up on any silences, ums, ahs, not sures, drill down a little bit deeper. And at some point, you're going to have a baseline of information where you feel we've got a starting point here. This feels and sounds like we've got something meaningful to work on. So then you need to establish clarity in terms of, okay, so now we've baselined everything. How are we actually going to do this stuff? What are you going to be responsible for? What am I going to be responsible for? Where are we going to be driving? What that route is going to look like? What sort of challenges you might face along the way? Will the level of support that I'm giving you perhaps need to vary through that course of driving? So then you're both on the same page. There's no vagueness. You clearly both understand what you're going to do. But critically, when the wheels start to get rolling, you don't necessarily know that what you've discussed and planned is actually then going to play out for real. So that's where practice comes in. So you need to obviously do some physical driving. You need to get wheels rolling. You need to see if what you're working on, how you're working on it, how you're supporting them is actually making a difference or not. And you shouldn't, in my experience, drive for that long before you then pull over and then go back into the discovery phase. So maybe 10, 15 minutes of the driving, you'd be surprised at how much you can cover in terms of 10 or 15 minutes. And you just pull over in a safe position, hopefully somewhere quiet where you can get the student disappearing into their heads again. And then you go back into asking open questions and using active listening. So it's a case of, okay, so we've done 10 minutes of driving. What are your thoughts? What went well? From your point of view, what perhaps didn't you feel went so well? Why? If we were to do it again, how could you do it differently? And so you're just teasing out information from them. Then you've got a new baseline. Then you need to clarify what you're going to do next. So, okay, so in the initial practice, we said we were going to work this way. In the next burst of practice, are we going to keep working that way, or do we need to change? Do I need to give you more support or perhaps less support? Great. So we've now got us both back on the same page again. Let's put another burst of practice in. And then it's just rinse and repeat. And it's exactly the same when it comes to ADI training and PDI training as well. The same processes apply.
So applying that to learners, I understand, and we've got the conversation. Is that what's missed, you think, with a lot of part 3 training then, is that it's not about the trainee, it's about the hours and the subjects that have got to be hit to be signed off for the hours?
Yes. So typically, a part 3 training session might look and sound a little bit like this. So, okay, so in this morning session, what we're going to look at is helping you as the PDI to learn how to teach parallel parking to a student who's never done it before. Okay, so these are the things that you need to understand and cover off. So first of all, we're looking at clutch control. We're also making sure that they know how to get it into reverse. We also need to cover off the importance of having effective all-round observations. Then we need to consider the accuracy of the maneuver. So the way that you do that is you follow these various steps. So from your starting point at the side of the road, you get your student to turn the steering wheel one full turn to the right, then they pull out, and then one full turn back to the left so they straighten up. And then they get next to the parked vehicle, not too close that they're nearly touching wing mirrors, but not too far over on the other side so they're nearly hitting the curb. Then what we do is we get them to go back in a straight line until their wing mirror lines up with this part of the car that they're next to. At that point, what they then need to do is turn the steering wheel one or one and a half full turns to the left, and then the car's going to come back to a 45-degree angle. You'll know when you're at that 45-degree angle because you'll be able to look here, and this is what you'll see. At that point, your student then needs to turn the steering wheel back one and a half turns to the right. Then they're going to go back slightly in a dead straight line until they get to this point. They'll know when they get at that point because they'll look at their door mirror and they'll see this reference point at that point. At that point, what they then need to do is turn the steering wheel 180 degrees to the right, and then the front will pivot in. Okay, got that. Right, let's go and put that into practice. I'm your student. I've never done this before. Teach me how to parallel park.
That confused me, and I think I know how to parallel park. You know, it's difficult because I do get some questions off students around things like that, maneuvers, where they've seen videos on YouTube or they've spoken to friends. And my friend said that they've been taught to do it this way or that way, or line this up, or they get given reference points. And I almost at times question what I'm doing because I don't use reference points. I don't know whether that's good for the students or not, but I'm finding it's much better when they understand what they are doing rather than do this, do that, do the other, and then all of a sudden they're magically where they wanted to go. So how can we take all of that information that turn the wheel 18 turns this way and get a 45-degree angle, all of that information, how can we help a PDI understand that, or at least be in a position to then teach someone that's never done it before? What changes
So
have
the
you made?
alternative approach might be to turn around to a PDI and say, so we're going to have a look at parallel parking today. So first of all, do you know how to parallel park? Yeah, of course I do. Cool. Can you give me an insight as to how you do it? Oh, that's an interesting question. I've never really thought about that before. I just do it. All right, okay. Let's just explore it a little bit, just for a few minutes. Okay, so you're sat at the side of the road and you've got a car in front and you're going to pull alongside it and then you're going to reverse into a parking position behind it. So, what would be the first thing that you would do? Um, well, first of all, I'd check around and make sure it's safe, and then I'd move alongside that vehicle. Cool. Where would you position yourself in that gap? Probably about in the middle. Okay, cool. Then what would you do? So get it into reverse. Great. Okay. Then what would you do? And so on and so on and so on. So through that simple conversation, you're leading the PDI to explain to you how they currently do it. Then it's a natural progression in terms of the conversation that you're having with them, right? Great. Okay. So first of all, let's put that into practice. Let's make sure that you actually can do it in the way that you've just explained it to me. And obviously it works. Great. Okay. So now you've thought about the process and now you've actually put that thinking into practice and you've followed your own instructions in terms of how to get your car into a parking position using parallel parking. How do you think you might be able to explain that to somebody else that had never done it before? Oh, well, I guess I just sort of talk them through what I've just done. Okay, cool. Do you think that would work? Yeah, I think so. All right, okay. Well, I'll tell you what, let's pretend for a moment now I'm a trainee. Okay, I learn. I've never done a parallel park before. Can you help me to understand how to parallel park based on the conversation that we've just had? Yeah, I think so. Okay, give it a go. See how you get on. Now, they might make a good job of it. They might not. They might stumble and fumble over their words. They might get a little bit embarrassed, feel a little bit intimidated. But you can then unpick it and you go, right, okay, so out of that little exercise, what have you learnt in terms of helping somebody else to understand how to parallel park? Oh, the moment I was trying to explain it to you, my head just got all a bit jumbled up and just, okay, so let's focus on that then. So, how can we help you to make that less jumbled? And so on and so forth. As I say, it's exactly the same process as if you were helping a learner.
That's one thing that I think I at one stage struggled with was the wording and trying to get specific words out in a set order. And it's like you're spending more time thinking about what you should be saying rather than just saying what needs saying. And then as you get more confident, or at least I found the more confident I get, I have students that do maneuvers all in slightly different ways. It's I have some that have found reference points that work for them. I have some that turn a bit earlier, a bit later, whatever it is that's going on. But I find it flows more naturally when it's done that way and you've got the information out of the trainee rather than here's a script, memorize the script. Because it's very difficult then to move away from the script if it's not working,
Yeah.
because that's all that's been practiced. I think it's difficult though to achieve that at scale because it takes time and energy from the trainers and then to account for what's been covered in the syllabus.
Mm.
It's trying to figure out whether it's the time frame of the 40 hours that are
Yep.
causing the constraints, the numbers, like you said early on, and it's crunching that side of it, or if the training needs to move more in line with the coaching and the client centered rather than a module system. But if PDIs are listening now and they're struggling with things, what advice would you give to them?
So, first of all, what I would say is I don't think um, anytime soon the industry is going to be moving away from, if you like, this set regimented way of delivering training in terms of 40 hours plus an additional 20 hours if you go on a pink license. I think that's pretty much here to stay. So we have to work with what we've got. Now, I wouldn't dissuade anybody from going with a national or larger or even a smaller driving school to do their Part 3 training. And if that's what they want to do, then great. Go through that face to face training, get your Part 1 passed, do your in car Part 2, hopefully pass that first attempt, and then you're into your Part 3. And there will be elements within that 40 hours of training, regardless of how it's delivered or the quality of the delivery, that is going to stick and resonate and work for almost any trainee. Unfortunately, a lot of it, probably, unless you've got a really, really good trainer, is going to get lost. It's going to just fly past you, and you won't even know that you've missed it until you actually come to sit your Part 3 test. And then you realize you're way, way, way below where you need to be. So for me, what I think is required, clearly I'm biased towards this because I run an online training company, but I think you need to supplement your in-car training with online training. And the benefit of online training is you get to re-watch it and revisit it over and over and over again. You can do it at home, you can do it in your own time, you can do it on any device. You can do it in little 15-minute chunks if you want, or a couple of hours. You can compare and contrast it to what perhaps you've been trained in car. You can see if what you're learning online complements what you've learned in car, or perhaps gives you a clearer picture and understanding of the things that you found confusing in the car, but now because you're watching it online and somebody else is demonstrating it and perhaps explaining it in a more simplistic way, then those light bulbs come on and you go, oh, right, yeah, I get it now. Now I understand it. And I think if you combine both face-to-face training with online training, then these days that's probably the best approach to setting yourselves up, not only to be a success in passing your part one, part two, and part three, hopefully on your first attempt. But the beauty of online training, as long as you use the right training course, is it doesn't just cover, if you like, the traditional 40-hour syllabus. It goes a lot deeper. So it teaches you all of those soft facing customer skills, in terms of how to recruit students, how to keep hold of students, how to get them to encourage, to recommend you to their friends or their other family members, how to build a reputation, how to manage your diary effectively, um, all of the other business operational issues that we all find out about when we've actually started doing the job for real, because we weren't actually taught them within our training, but suddenly they come and slap us in the face. And oh, right, okay, yeah, I need to know that as well now. So I think, for a fraction of the cost of what you would pay for a 40 to 60-hour traditional course, you're going to get at least some excellent complementary training. And at best, if you decide to look at the online training route in the first place before you sign a contract with a driving school for maybe £2,500, £3,000, you might actually also save yourself a huge amount of time, stress, anxiety, and money, because it's as effective. Unless you're going down the trainee license route, you don't need to have 40 hours signed off. You don't need to get an additional 20 hours. And I think it's, for me personally, it's a more effective way of training now that we are able to utilize online training technologies effectively.
It's definitely a challenge. And you've mentioned about 4 or 5 topics there that we can definitely do an episode on each one of them in the future. But you know what? You're right. There is so much to this. I've mentioned it numerous times on episodes in the past. It's not just about teaching someone how to drive a car. It's keeping those students, like you said, it's building a business, developing a brand. There's so much that we need to be able to do. And generally, there's probably not time in a 40-hour window unless you're looking elsewhere. And that's something I wish I'd done more of. And I'm hoping anyone watching this is either qualified and we've learnt a few lessons through the process, or if you're at the research stage, great, because there's so much content out there with so many different people, but they need researching as well. Like you said, it needs to be good, credible people that are going to be giving you the best and the most up-to-date information to qualify. And that's another minefield. I'm sure we could be here for a while discussing that. TikTok,
Absolutely.
YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. We'd have some fun with that. But yeah, it's that's been mentioned before, the supplementary training. And I know that a lot of people have found that's what's helped them qualify is hearing from different people. It might be the same topic, it might be the same thing, but it's been said slightly differently, and now they get it.
I won't name them because I don't think that would be fair on them, because they may not wish me to mention their name. But I do know an online trainer that has been around for a number of years, that actually designed an online training course specifically to help trainees, PDIs of a certain national driving school, to understand that driving school's training program. So he literally took them through, right, okay, so what you've been asked to do in your first training day for part three is this. Now, What that actually means is this. Okay, so if you didn't understand it from your trainer, hopefully now I've made it nice and simple for you. And he built quite a successful business, literally selling online training courses to people that had already bought a traditional training course to help them to understand how to get through that training course. And that's crazy.
I can see why people struggle. And there's the other side of it as well. There is so much good content out there
There is.
that's free and accessible for anyone. So many people putting out good free content where I think sometimes it can be a little overwhelming for people as well. And
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to hear your thoughts. I have an opinion, maybe we'll go into that, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on how do you deal with it? There's so much good, so much bad. There's only so many hours in the day. There's only so much YouTube you can watch, so many podcasts you can listen to, so many books you can read. If we've got someone watching that's found all of this information and they want to be a driving instructor, what advice would you give them?
I think it would be the same as the advice I would offer to anybody that was looking to find resources to help them learn and develop in whatever it might be, regardless of whether it's becoming a driving instructor or not. And you're right. There's so much digital content out there now. It is almost overwhelming. And yes, it is of a very very mixed quality. And the problem that you have as an individual is knowing what's bad, knowing what's good. Okay? And unfortunately, to that extent, it is a bit of trial and error. That said, what I personally would do, and I think on that basis, what I would recommend to other people is find a resource, whether that's YouTube or a particular person on YouTube or a particular online training course that gives you some examples that you don't need to pay for in terms of what that training process will look like and the content that you're going to get access to. And just sort of dip your toe in without paying money, without making a commitment, and just see and get a sense if that person and that style of training and delivery resonates with you. Does it make sense to you? Do you engage with that person that you're watching on a screen or engage with their content if they're not somebody that wants to have their face on the screen? Are they explaining things in a way that makes sense to you? And I think that's a great first starting point because I think if people, i.e., online content creators, have put that amount of effort into making their content feel accessible and easy to understand and simple to implement, then the likelihood is that that's a good training program. If it's somebody that's just stuck a dash cam on with their iPhone, just having a little bit of a chat while they're driving along and just being a little bit anecdotal about, you know, what they think about being a driving instructor is about or how they go about teaching somebody, probably isn't the best advice. Okay, I'm not saying they're wrong. What they say might be great. But you're probably not going to get the right level of support from that type of content as you would if you went to somebody or an organization that had clearly put an awful lot of thought, effort, and commitment into creating a resource that they were very, very confident was going to deliver real value to whoever was watching it. And that might be free, it might be paid, it might be a combination of both.
I like that. It comes back to research again, I think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Research, dip your toes in, see where you get on, because that's what I'm learning now. And my thoughts with all of it is the people. I'm struggling because I really enjoy talking to everyone that comes on the podcast. I need someone that I don't get on with to come on at some point. But the people, I think that makes a huge difference. And again, I'm hearing from people that they're maybe not clicking with their trainer. And it's such a challenging position to find yourself. You've spent a lot of money, you've invested a lot of time, you've got a test looming, and you're not clicking with your trainer. And that's a really difficult position to be in, even if you are getting all of these other resources, whether it's free or paid. The in-car practical, the necessary training maybe isn't the most enjoyable experience. And I'm not in a position to advise on that, but what I would be doing now with hindsight and everything else would be finding another trainer, looking around and getting a second opinion because there are so many great people out there. We don't just need to stick to this one way that's not working for us. We need to be looking around because ultimately it's our business. We might be part of a school, we might be part of a franchise. We're sole traders generally. It's our
Mhm.
business. And long term, you need to put yourself in the best position to build that business and develop. But that's my view is get a second opinion if it's not clicking.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you again coming back to research, just ask around, speak to other driving instructors about their experiences, who they trained with, was that good, was it bad? Is there anybody else that they might perhaps recommend? Have they heard good things about? It might be an individual that operates as a trainer. It might be a driving school, could be local, could be regional, could be national. Um, don't believe the reviews on people's websites because they're always going to paint that business in the best possible lights. And it doesn't mean that you're going to get the same experience as some of the other quotes that you've read from supposed trainees that have gone through that process with that training school. So it is a case of buyer beware. When if you're going to go and sign up for an expensive training course that's got sort of contractual terms and conditions on it, do make sure you read the terms and conditions very carefully and ask the awkward questions because that's important. Um, See if you can, if possible, often it isn't, to have a conversation with the person that's actually going to be training you, as opposed to the person that's selling you the driving or instructor training course, because they're not the same person. They're very, very different individuals, different skill sets. And the person that you're really relying on to get you through this whole process is not the person that's taking payment from you. It's the person that's going to be supporting you to get through, particularly your part two and your part three test. So if you are in a situation where you're told to turn up for a training session with somebody that you've never met or spoken before, then you're putting yourself in a bit of an awkward position because there's a high likelihood, as you've just said, you're not going to hit it off. Just as people, yeah, you're very different personalities and you just don't gel. Um, and then the whole process is already off to a poor start. And it then just gets harder and harder and harder typically from there. And you might find that on one session you get one trainer, on another session you get another trainer. How does that work? There's no continuity. So I think from my point of view, there are two basic schools of thought, no pun intended, when it comes to promoting ADI training courses. You've got, if you like, the commercial starting point is we're a business and we want to sell driving instructor training courses. How can we sell as many of those as possible for as much as possible and keep our operating expenses to a minimum? And then they create a business model around that. It's for their own commercial objectives. I'm not saying they don't care anything about the trainees, but it always will be coming back to numbers, back to the spreadsheet, back to the profit and loss account. Are we making as much as we want to make? How can we make more? Where can we shed cost? So that's approach number one. Approach number two is where I come from, and I think a lot of other people come from, is how can I give the best possible support to PDIs to help them through the process and not to make the same mistakes that I've made. If I make some money along the way from doing that, great, fantastic. Yeah, who doesn't like making money? But that's not your purpose. That's not your goal. That's not your drive and your ambition. And I think for me, if you are the sort of person that wants, if you like, a gift wrapped, neatly packaged, one size fits all type of solution, so you're gonna get 40 hours, 60 hours part three training, you're going to get 10 hours of in-car, you're going to get all these resources for part one. And then when you qualified, you're going to be guaranteed a job, which you're not. And you're going to be earning 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 pounds a year, and you're going to get a brand new dual control training car, which is yours to use outside of lessons. If that's the sort of thing that floats your boat, then you're probably going to go the route towards the companies that want to sell it to you for their commercial gain. And unfortunately, partway through the training process, you may well find out that actually all of that gift wrapping is superfluous. It's meaningless. It looked and sounded fancy, but actually in reality, things are very different to what you were led to believe. The alternative approach is to go with a training company, whether that's face to face, online, or a combination of the two, where you feel like you're dealing with an individual or individuals who are passionate about supporting you, because they're gonna have your back. They're going to stand behind you. They're going to stand behind their own credibility and their own reputation. They won't want to let you down. And if things aren't going according to plan and you're struggling, they'll help you through it.
More great advice there. Lots of really good points that I say it on nearly every episode. I think we all make the same journey into the industry, and then we look back and we're like, maybe I could have done that a little bit better. But hopefully now with the content that is being put out there, more and more people can find a better, more suitable route for them so that they don't make the same mistakes. That's the hope. But what I do have now for you, if we can, I've got a new part of the show. Some questions we might delve into a little more than expected, maybe not, but some tell me questions. Do you mind if we go through them?
No, go for it.
So we've got the first one then. Can you tell me what car you would drive if it was the only car you could ever drive?
Um, One that got me from A to B, was reliable and hopefully relatively inexpensive to run.
Have you got any in mind?
The one that I drive at the moment, which is the Ford Focus, does a pretty good job, to be perfectly honest.
Yep. Easy to fix as well, aren't they?
Yes, although I've just put it in for a service, which cost me 320 quid. But yeah, I'm not a big car nut. I'm not a petrol head. I don't get turned on by fancy or
No?
flashy cars. No, I mean, if money was no object, I'd probably have something like a Bentley or something like that. But yeah, that's not reality, is it?
And I'm not sure that's going to get you reliably from A to B consistently.
Exactly, and it's going to cost a hell of a lot.
Maybe I'll add into there next time. Money is no object. And then we'll delve into that. But we'll get on to the next one. So, can you tell me if you could deliver a driving lesson to anyone, who would it be?
Ooh, this might sound a little bit corny or cheesy. I don't know. Probably my 17-year-old self. Knowing what I know now and doing the job as I do it, not saying that I'm by any means the best in the industry, I think I'm reasonably good at what I do, um, then I would have liked to have that type of driving lesson. I think it would have really set me on a path, not just to learn how to drive, but I think it would have stimulated my thinking in terms of being asked questions and being given the responsibility to learn and develop and encouraged and supported rather than just being taught and lectured at. I think would have had a broader impact on my life than just learning to drive.
That's a great answer. I like that. I'm sat there thinking now, what would that look like for me? Me delivering a lesson to 17-year-old Josh. And I don't think I'd have listened to me. I still
No.
don't. No, no. At 17, I'm not convinced I'd have listened to anyone. Hence, I joined the military. Um, but yeah, that's an interesting one. I like that because this job can be so impactful for people because the way you described it then, the asking the questions and the taking responsibility for learning, we don't tend to get that until learning to drive and then potentially whatever happens later on in life. That tends to
I
be one of the
have so
first.
I have or have had quite a few students that at the end of the process, when they pass their L test, whether it's first attempt or maybe second or even a number of attempts after that, basically break down in tears, not because they've passed their driving test, but they've achieved something they didn't think they were ever going to be able to achieve. And that is just massively powerful. And it's just fantastic to see. And you just know that that's enriched their lives in a way that goes way beyond just getting their full license.
I love it. That's why I enjoy this job. There's so many perks to it, and that is a massive one. Giving, well, not giving, but facilitating someone achieving that independence. It's great.
Mm,
So
totally
a
agree.
good answer. I like that one. Your 17-year-old self. I wonder if we'll get any more of them in the future. Um, but we'll move on to the next one. Can you tell me the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I don't think, again, I'm not ducking the question. I don't think, in all honesty, I mean, I've obviously over nearly 60 years now. I've received lots of information and advice from lots of people over lots of things. But I think, in the context of perhaps your question, what I would say is I don't think there's one single piece of advice I've ever been given that's made such a difference to me that it stuck with me forever and a day. I think, again, it's going to come back to a point that perhaps I've mentioned several times throughout this video is I love the concept of simplicity, and I've watched and studied a lot of people talking about it from all different perspectives, not just driver training, but from an academic perspective, from a commercial perspective, from all sorts of different angles, and taking people's different views on why it's so important and valuable to boil things down and boil them down and boil them down until you get to the most simplistic way of communicating something that's important to somebody else. So I think that for me, that's probably the most important thing I've learned is simplicity.
I like that. There's a lot to be said for that. It takes practice. It I think it takes you for us to make something simple for students, we've got to have a real good understanding of it and we've got to develop. And the more we know, the easier we can make it for them.
You need to know it inside out, back to front, and upside down. But then the challenge is right, okay, so how much of what I now know can I strip out? And I can still get the same message across, but in a far, far easier way to understand and implement. And then once you've done that once, as I said earlier, you go through a refinement process. So then you reflect and you go, right, okay, so I've stripped out 50% of it. Is there any more I can strip out? So you try and strip out another 25%, and you use simpler language and shorter words, or you come at it from a different way. You use a demonstration, or you ask a question instead of giving an explanation. And then suddenly, what you found took you half an hour to teach somebody is now taking 10 minutes. And not only that, their engagement has gone up massively. They're really enjoying their driving lessons. And again, they're achieving things that they thought were going to be really hard because maybe their mates have told them it was hard or difficult, or they've been watching stuff on TikTok and it all sounds confusing and complicated. And then, within 10 minutes, go, oh, I thought that was going to be really, really hard. It's not, is it? That's the beauty of simplicity. And when you get to that point, you've cracked it.
I love it. I've lost track of where we're at, so I'm going to fire another question at you because that went off on a good tangent. I love it. So yeah, another good answer. That answers one of the questions somewhere, I think. But we'll get on to the next one. Can you tell me your favorite book? And this doesn't need to be industry related. It doesn't need to be anything. Just your favorite book.
Um, this is possibly gonna be a little bit embarrassing. um, Probably it's not a book, it's a series of books, if you like. It would be any and all of the A Milne or Winnie the Pooh stories. I just love them. I love them as a kid. I love them as a parent, reading them to my young children. But also, interestingly, I don't know if it's still a thing. It certainly was about 10 years ago, but there was a whole sort of industry building up around the whole Winnie the Pooh characters. You've got your Eeyore and you've got your Tigger and you've got your Winnie and you've got all of the other, Roo and Kanga, and there was almost like a self-help industry developed around which of these characters do you most resonate with and why. And I think his writing, again, is so simplistic. When you read it, there are so few words on a page, but it emotes and communicates so much. And you just get a very, very clear sense of who these characters are, um, with the minimal of words. I'm sure it took him an awful lot of effort to get that message or convey these characters across in so few words, but he does it very successfully.
I love that. We got deep with Winnie the Pooh and the books and the stories behind it. A lot of time for that. Yeah, those books are great. Reading them to the kids, and it's yeah, no, nothing to be embarrassed about there. Um, a good answer. And
I'm sure I should have said something far more intellectual or industry related, but they're the
when
ones
you
that resonate
said
most with me.
when you said this could be embarrassing, I'm sat thinking, I wonder where this is going to go. Do you know what didn't pop into my head? But it's good. You can have that one. So we'll
Thanks.
get on to the next one before we get too deep on Winnie the Pooh. We'll save that for another episode. We'll pick it apart. We'll figure out the characters and how we'd deliver a driving lesson to them. But can you tell me one message that you would give to someone who's considering coming into this industry? Now, I think we've done this in the episode, through the episode. So just one message.
Go in with your eyes wide open and keep it simple.
I like that. The theme of the episode and a very simple, straight to the point answer that covers a lot as well. A great answer.
Thanks again.
Can you tell me one piece of advice you would give a student before going for their driving test? So this is L student on a driving
L
test.
student. Okay. Um, Trust in yourself. You've got this.
Again, very simple. And I think there's a lot to that is telling yourself that you can do it.
Yeah. It's like most things in life, it stems from a sense of self-belief. Yeah. If you don't believe in yourself, then you're halfway to failure.
A good answer. Last one then. Can you tell me something you wish you was better at?
Oh God. Um, many things. I think one of the biggest regrets I've got, in a sense, I'd love to be able to play a musical instrument.
What instrument?
Probably piano. I tried to learn the guitar as a kid. I found that very awkward and difficult, and I quickly gave up on that. I've dabbled about with just tinkering around on the ivories and see if see if I had any sort of aptitude towards that. But again, just found it all complicated. As soon as I get a sheet of music in front of me, just my brain switches off. I just it's like algebra to me. It doesn't make any sense. But yeah, I wish I'd found maybe somebody that could teach me or train me how to play a musical instrument to a point where I wasn't an embarrassment.
There you go. For anyone watching that maybe wants to do a trade-off, if you're any good at playing any instruments, give him a shout. But that's interesting. I've never been able to read music or play any instruments, and it's a good skill to have. It's an interesting skill to have.
I think it's a very sociable skill. I mean, I love it when over the years, been out on quite a few stag do's, and one or two of the members of the group were reasonably competent, if not very competent musicians, and they bring their guitar along, or they'll be able to sit at a piano if there's one in the pub. And not only does it entertain the group, but it entertains everybody else, and it's just great to be able to just strum out or um, tap out a tune on the piano that everybody knows. It gets a bit of a sing along going, and it just raises the spirits. I think
I
if
love
you can
it.
play a musical instrument, one that you can carry around, and one that's easy to listen to, then I think you're never going to be short of friends, and you'll never have difficulty in finding new friends.
I love it. What a great answer. So we will, I lied. It's not the last one. We've got another question now. Is there anything else that you'd like to share? Any final messages for the episode?
Um, No, I don't think so. I think we've probably covered off a lot. Hopefully, people have found it enjoyable and continue to find it enjoyable and helpful. That's the main thing. Hope I've given some people maybe some genuine, honest, heartfelt advice and guidance that is going to make a little bit of a difference to them. And if they want to check me out on my YouTube channel, then please do so, or check out the website, which is advancedadi.co.uk. Use the same if you're searching me on YouTube as well. It's just AAT and then in brackets advancedadi.co.uk. And if anybody wants to reach out to me, I'd love to hear from them. Whatever stage they're at in terms of their training, or if they've already qualified and they're looking for some additional support, perhaps standards check support, or they just want to have a little bit of a chat. That's absolutely fine. Yeah. I'm always willing to listen and support where I can.
Jeff, it's been amazing. Really enjoyed having a chat with you tonight. What we'll do with the links, we'll put them in the description. So anyone that wants to find you, we will put that in there. And any other information that you want me to put in, contact info, how people can reach out, we'll get it put in the description so that
Okay.
people can do so. But
That'd
thank
be
you very much
great.
for your
Thank you.
time. It's been
Oh,
great to
thank
chat with you.
you.